think that we're all good. And I'm assuming everyone can hear me, so I'm just going to charge on ahead. So again, we're just really honored here at the WALL Project to get to sort of co-conceive and co-present this workshop with National Working Positive Coalition on women living, learning, and working with HIV, advancing education, employment, and economic empowerment. And this is a really this is a key aspect of our work and our materials at the WALL Project, and also just a key aspect of our values and practice as an organization and as folks in this community. Just quickly, and please also, since we didn't get to check in, Susana and Florencia, our interpreters, if you can let me know if I am speaking too quickly or anything like that, please just let me know if I need to slow down or anything. But so just quickly going through our agenda, we'll just start with a, we'll intro the organizations that took part in and the program that this session is under, is kind of the initial event of a new initiative of ours. We'll talk about some benefits and barriers to employment and education. I think that some of what comes up will be really familiar to folks who are here in the room. And then I will turn it over to Grisel, our moderator, who will introduce Connie Johnson, who will give a presentation, a really just in-depth overview of Black women economic inequality in HIV. And then the meat of this, of our time together, is really the conversation among the amazing panelists that we have gathered here, who you'll get to learn much more about in just a minute. And then really we're anticipating a nice kind of active, meaty kind of discussion around the Q&A. Certainly, folks are welcome to ask questions, but are also welcome to share their own experiences, going back to employment, education, just to share your own journeys as well. And I think that we're going to have some kind of named special guests as well during that period of the session. Just to briefly give a little face of our panelists, and to introduce the WALL Project. We are a nonprofit organization, for those who don't know, the WALL Project, with a mission to change the course of the HIV/AIDS pandemic through a unique and comprehensive focus on women and girls, cis and trans women and girls. And our basis is really working with technology and leveraging technology to improve health outcomes, increase quality of life for women and girls living with HIV. And all those present, if you have not already, are welcome to can fully experience the resources that we have to offer on the wellproject.org. So She, Her, They is an initiative here at the WALL Project that we're really excited about. I just realized I did not introduce myself. Olivia Ford, I'm the editorial director for the WALL Project. My pronouns are she and they. Speaking of which, this is a really just multi-tiered, multifaceted educational outreach initiative that we've just launched that will span over the next year. And it is really just about approaching health and in the spirit of a culture of wellness and from a holistic lens, and really working to integrate sexual and reproductive health and sex positivity into a wider swath of programming. That's always been a commitment of ours, really just expanding that commitment, and also expanding it's really a process and a journey, expand the accessibility of the materials that we're producing, which includes moving toward making a practice of moving toward language justice and making more of our materials available, first in Spanish and hopefully in other languages going forward in the future. Of course, our just absolutely powerful, illustrious co-sponsoring organization is the National Working Positive Coalition. They have been really just powerfully active in this space around employment and vocational rehabilitation and access to services for people living with HIV for many years. And Olivia, I believe I saw, yes.
Just one, if you can slow down a little bit for the Spanish.
Gotcha, thank you. Is this a little better? Okay, is this a little better? I'll just keep going, but yeah, thank you for the heads up. All right, so just a little bit more detail about the webinar itself. We have lost a few minutes, but we're gonna go on till about 2:30, 2:30 Eastern time. You can use the chat to communicate with one another, to reach out to the hosts, the panelists, and you can also ask questions there, though during the Q&A, there will be the opportunity, if you wish, to come off mute and actually speak and share your experiences. You can indicate that you would like that to happen by using the raised hand feature on the webinar to let us know that you'd like to come off mute and so that we can hear your voice. So just quickly again, just some framing of the discussion that we're about to have. But again, this is really just sort of giving some facts and just a little bit of an overview of what we're really going to have the chance to go much deeper with in the conversation of with the panelists as well. So just the bottom line is that every person living with HIV has the right to tools and support to make well-informed decisions about education, employment, benefits, and other economic opportunities. And it's well documented that that employment is associated with physical, mental health, quality of life, health outcomes, particularly for people living with HIV. And again, these are kind of well documented facts, and I'm really looking forward to kind of broadening the sense of what hearing the panelists sort of talk about what that kind of sense of dignity and self-worth looks like, even beyond kind of employment and education, including but not limited to employment and education in the conversation to come. And of course, we've kind of touched on the benefits of employment, education, and there are certainly numerous barriers, social, economic, and otherwise, to accessing services to seek employment, as well as to the workforce itself, and to furthering education and training itself as well. And some of that, a significant aspect of that barrier, which again I think that some people may be quite familiar with, is the fact that there's a requirement with a number of services and affordable quality care to make under a certain income in the US. So that has certainly posed a barrier or a limit to kind of to the ability to sort of be expansive about choices around education, training. And of course, these negative outcomes around employment are more prevalent among Black and Indigenous and other people of color, among LGBTQ, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer individuals, women, people who use drugs, older adults, and people with experience with incarceration. And all these folks are also just broadly disproportionately impacted by exclusion from the labor market and also by poverty. And of course, also lack of employment is associated with conditions and circumstances and activities that can be for survival, for the need of survival, have been known to increase vulnerability to HIV and also create additional barriers, unfortunately, because of the way that systems are set up to accessing health and employment services. And these are areas around, again, National Working Positive Coalition and other organizations have just worked really, have made some really incredible inroads into, and continue to do so, to ensure that service providers and people living with HIV have adequate access to information about trainings, about the work and earnings related policies for key programs, such as Social Security, disability, Medicare, Medicaid, ADAP, Ryan White, and HOPWA, housing options for people with AIDS, and Section 8 also as a housing support. And of course, these are all areas, I'm just gonna let Grisel's slide sit there for a minute. These are all areas on which training and additional information are just very deeply needed across the board in HIV services and beyond. I am going to unshare my slides for the moment because I want to be able to give a full and warm and accurate and complete welcome and intro to the moderator of our session today. And I can't share and also see my notes at the same time. Grisel, in addition to having a master's degree in social work and over a decade of experience managing HIV programming in a healthcare setting in the Los Angeles area, participating in community planning at a local and national level, including the LA County Commission on HIV, as well as PACHA, the President's Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. She is also the amazing newly minted Deputy Director of the Well Project and my coworker. So I am going to pass the mic over to Grisel and let me know if you need me to, if you'd like me to sort of click the slide back on, but I'm just gonna pass it over to you.
We're okay. Maybe we can just start setting up the next set of slides. So buenos días or buenas tardes, people on the East Coast. My name is Grisel Granados, pronouns ella, she, her. And I'm happy to be with you all today. It is an honor to moderate today's conversation. We have a great program prepared for you today, so thank you so much for joining us. And we're gonna get our next set of slides started. Because we're gonna have a brief presentation on Black women, economic inequality, and HIV. And so I'll read the bio of our presenter today. So Connie L. Johnson is an author, community advocate, and transformational speaker. Connie uses her professional, academic, and lived experiences to create solutions to social injustices that adversely affect historically marginalized communities. She is the founder of Growing into Greatness, a grassroots community-focused nonprofit organization that aims to develop whole, self-sustaining communities. So welcome, Connie, and I'm going to hand over the mic to you now as we get your slides set up.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Connie Johnson, I just had a beautiful bio read. Thank you so much, Grisel. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, great. So here's the presentation. I'll wait for these slides to come up, but to help kind of frame what's about to happen, we are going to look at particularly Black women. And when I'm saying Black women, this goes beyond color. This is a particular group of women who are the descendants of enslaved Africans. We hear about slavery, we hear about reparations, we hear about racism and police brutality, and we hear about all of these things that are happening still today. And there's a reason why it happened. There's a reason why we're still having these discussions. And so I am about to go through a presentation, a very brief presentation that's a part of a larger presentation that I have developed with some research around Black women, economic inequality, and HIV. So here we are, we have our slides here, and I would ask if there are any questions that we can, or comments that if you put them in the chat, maybe we can come to them when it's time to do the Q&A later. And I'll also have my contact information at the end if you'd like to get in contact with me after the presentation. Okay, and I know I said that I wanted to do my own slides, but please, next slide. Thank you. So as stated, my name is Connie Johnson. I was raised in Orangeburg, South Carolina, which is about 50-60 miles from Charleston, South Carolina, which is the actual entry point for at least 40 to 60% of all African Americans that are currently living in the United States. So I have been raised in this environment where that history is a part of me. And so a lot of times that history is not a part of the core of who we are. And I'm particularly speaking of Black women, but I have had the privilege of being raised and steeped in that history, being so close to that port. I am the oldest daughter of Gladys Bell Dean Johnson, who passed away in 1995 of AIDS-related illness. I also was diagnosed with AIDS in 2002. I am a Common Threads graduate. This was my entrance or introduction to working with and alongside women living with HIV. I thought that me and my mom were the only ones. And through this work, I discovered that there is an army of women like me who are doing amazing things and beautiful work. I am a community and youth advocate. We'll get into a little bit of how and why that happened a little later. I am also a graduate of Loyola University, Chicago, and I studied social justice and community development. Next slide, please. So here's a framing quote that kind of frames or gives me a basis for what it is we're going to talk about today. And it's from W.E.B. Du Bois. If you've never heard of him or if you're not aware of his writings, I would suggest, and I could even suggest a few of his titles when we get to the end, because his work is extraordinary and still very much so pertinent for today. We should measure the prosperity of the nation, not by the number of millionaires, but the absence of poverty, the prevalence of health, the efficiency of public schools, and the number of people who can and do read worthwhile books. So while much of America determines prosperity based on the number of millionaires and billionaires that we have, and we call it quote unquote Black excellence, W.E.B. Du Bois says that we should maybe look at some other factors when we're determining what prosperity looks like as a nation. Next slide, please. So we're looking at American history through the lens of Black women, through the lens of women who were brought to this nation as enslaved labor. And so although many historians say that history goes back to about 1700s. I'm going to start with the 1800s. So from 1800 to the 1920s, although it is said that slavery was abolished in 1865 through the signing of the Declaration, through the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, many women did not get that memo that we were freed. And so here we're coming up on a celebration called Juneteenth, which is the celebration of the last plantation in Texas to discover that freedom has come upon us. And so that's a whole nother conversation. But I wanted to look at some of the issues that Black women have faced economically, as far as labor, and emotionally, socially, sexually, that doesn't get discussed, I think, often enough. Next slide, please. So here's a quote that kind of encapsulates what it was like, and possibly very, very possible what it is like to be a Black woman in America, where whiteness and maleness is the pinnacle of power. Black in a white society, slave in a free society, women in society ruled by men, female slaves had the least formal power and were perhaps the most vulnerable group of Americans. And that quote is by Deborah Gray White. So we're talking about employment, we're talking about labor, and we're talking about education. And so I wanted to kind of lay out what the job description of an enslaved woman was in the 17, 18, 1900s. And so you were to polish silver and furniture, wash clothes, draw baths, barber men, sweep, empty chamber pots, carry water, wash dishes, look after children, tend to elderly family members, cook, bake, milk cows, feed chickens, sew, knit, plant and cultivate cotton, rice, corn, sugarcane, and or tobacco, dig ditches, cut and haul wood, slaughter livestock, bear and rear children. Now that is a description of someone who has not even been touched sexually. So when we add the emotional labor, the mental labor, the spiritual labor it takes to survive the conditions on a plantation, in addition to the work that's being asked to be done, we are having a very different conversation about the trauma that's happened among Black women, the economic inequality, the gap that happens between women, particularly Black women and white women. And so not only are we looking at that trauma, we're looking at that labor, we're also looking at the fact that there was no money. This is done for no money. As a matter of fact, not only is there $0, but you actually are the commodity as a person. As a result of heavy work, poor housing conditions, and inadequate diet, the average Black woman did not live past 40. I had my 45th birthday back in September, so I'm getting ready to turn 46. But according to this particular quote in my research, that most Black women did not live past 40, which is unfortunate. Next slide, please. And so in the 1930s, 1940s era, we have what's called the Great Migration. This is a time where technically in the South, Black men and women have been freed, to buy land, to buy and sell, to vote, at the time they were able to vote because you have a Freedmen's Bureau, you have what's known as the, so there's this period where not only are Black folks engaged in politics, engaged in economic development, engaged in all of the areas that make America great. And then so what happens is the Ku Klux Klan rides in, and there is this very violent, very damaging movement to destroy any and all Black progress. So a lot of people, a lot of Africans, Americans from Africa out of slavery packed their things and they moved. That is known as the Great Migration. A lot of them went to Baltimore, Chicago, New York, out to California, because there's this industrial boom that happens during this time. And so they are seeking better economic conditions and better social conditions where they're not hunted, to be honest. Next slide, please. So here we have, a lot of folks have moved into different areas, and still yet, the vast majority of Black women migrants enter into a domestic service industry. So we've moved from the South where, there's that zero pay, but still the work is about the same as domestic servants. A small group of educated Black women work as clerical workers. Black women no longer live with their employers. They now do their work and return home to their families. In the 1960s, the life expectancy of a Black woman is 66 years of age. So in the 1800s, we're looking at the life expectancy of a Black woman being 40. By 1960, that life expectancy is 66 years old. Although that's a lot better, 66 years on Earth is a lot better than 40. However, it's still 8 years less than the average white woman during the same time. Also, that happens as a result of this great migration that happens, there is still a lot of poverty. Families are torn apart, and there's this boom of single-led households, single women-led households. And in 1965, a report was created called the Moynihan Report, and it outlines the potential decay. It basically, the Moynihan Report basically gives this outline of what's to come in many urban cities, in many quote unquote ghettos that we see now because of the fact that the African-American family is deteriorating. And so by 1970, unfortunately, a lot of what was in that report came true. So inner cities are plagued by crime, poverty, and unemployment. There's also this class divide that happens because there is a small percentage of African Americans or Black folks who are able to secure economic power for themselves, and they move into the middle class, they move into the upper middle class, and there's this divide that happens. So you have there this small group of African Americans who are doing well and thriving in the way things are, but then you have a vast majority who are languishing in poverty and violence and a lot of like undesired conditions. Next slide, please. So the 70s to the 2000s, let's celebrate. So these beautiful, beautiful women in all their regalia represent what was happening for Black women in the 1970s to the 2000s. So Black women have more access to education. Because of the more access to education, they have more access to economic opportunities. And so there is a celebration that's happening. Next slide, please. So in the 1980s, a movement away from domestic work happens, and we're moving into better occupations. This particularly benefited older Black women workers. And so there's also this overall wage difference between Black and white women is relatively small in the 1980s, so that the economic wage difference and gap that once existed is not only closing, but Black women at some point are out earning their white counterparts. In 2007, 19% of Black women 25 and older have a college degree. In 2017, Black women's median annual earnings is 21% less than white women. So let's go back and look. So by 2007, 19% of Black women have a college degree. But in 2017, the median annual earnings is 21% less than white women, which means that the way in which economic or educational accomplishments equate to economic empowerment does not happen for Black women in the way that it does for white women. And we can look at why maybe in another presentation. And 80% of Black mothers are the breadwinners in their families during this time. Next slide, please. So in 1980, the life expectancy of a Black woman is 72.5. It was 66. And so we're moving on up there. So now the life expectancy is 72, and that's 6 years. So that gap was 8 years less than white women. Now it's 6 years. 2002, life expectancy for a Black woman is 75, which is 5 years less. So that gap of the life expectancy is also closing as we continue to move within these years. Next slide, please. And let's just talk about what this conclusion looks like. It's bittersweet. So the good news is more than 25% of Black women have earned a college degree or a higher level of education. So when we look at where we started, it's almost like we started from the bottom and now we are here. And so we look at that first slide where there was, all of these job descriptions and there's no accomplishment whatsoever for Black women, like literally the bottom of the barrel, the bottom of the heap. We now have 25% of Black women who are earning college degrees, many times college degrees from institutions where Black people were not even allowed to set foot on unless they were servants themselves. And so we celebrate that. 17% of Black women are in the process of starting or running a new business. So Black women entrepreneurs are pretty much the top tier of people starting new businesses. And so we celebrate that when we talk about the economic inequality of Black women and Black women being an actual commodity themselves, not only coming from being a commodity to now owning their own businesses. We celebrate that. And we have increased visibility of high earning Black women in entertainment, sports, and film. When we look at women like Oprah Winfrey, we look at Rihanna, and we look at all of these major earning women in the entertainment, in sports, in film, even in business, we celebrate those accomplishments because it was unheard of by many of the forefathers of this nation that Black women would ever achieve these kinds of things. But that's not the whole story to be told as to where we are now. Next slide, please. So what we're really dealing with. So although we celebrate the accomplishments of women in business and women who are thriving in this nation, we also have to be really, really cognizant of the fact that that represents a very small percentage. 26.5% of Black women currently live in poverty. Black women make up 29% of the prison population, and Black women account for 61% of new HIV diagnoses among women in the United States. And so when we look at Black women and we look at education inequality, when we look at economic inequality, I know it's easy. It's a little bit easier for us to be able to say, well, look at so-and-so and look at so-and-so and look at all of these examples. And I can honestly be honest with you. I am a woman living with HIV who has a master's degree and is an entrepreneur. I can look at myself and say, I made these accomplishments and this kind of thing. However, I can't be so focused on that part of society to not notice that there are sisters among us who are really, really struggling economically, struggling when it comes to literacy, struggling when it comes to being breadwinners and being sole providers for children. And so we have to look at the full picture of what it is that we are dealing with, and we're going to create solutions to these issues. And so I hope there's something in this presentation that has maybe sparked your interest or made you maybe think something through. But that is the end of this presentation. And I hope I said something that means something to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Connie, for that wonderful conversation, for that wonderful presentation. I'm looking forward to our panel conversation up next so that we can dive into modern labor conditions for women living with HIV specifically, and continue to make those connections and discuss the direct impact of the history you just presented on conditions today. So I want to invite our other two panelists on the screen, okay? And I'll introduce them now. So Tiami Luckett is a national organizer and a program manager for Positively Trans at the Transgender Law Center. She is a native of Arkansas and currently resides in Little Rock. She identifies as a woman of trans experience and of African descent. Aisha Scott is a member of the Well Project's Community Advisory Board and Positive Women Network USA's Communication and Training Program Assistant. She is a public and motivational speaker, health educator, mentor, peer, and support group facilitator based in Broward County, Florida. Excuse my ESL. Okay, so thank you for being here today. It is a wonderful panel. I am very happy to have this conversation with you all today. So let's go ahead and get started. We can get started with having you each introduce yourselves, a more personal introduction than what I just read. And let's get into it and share what your journey has been around employment or education.
I'll go. Hi, everybody. My name is Tiami Luckett. My pronouns are she, her, hers. You heard where I am. You might not know like exactly where I came from, okay? But I was diagnosed with HIV in 2012. And I got into advocacy shortly after in 2014. I've said it before and I'll say it again. When the opportunity presented itself for me to do this work, I jumped on it because it was me making good on a promise that I made to my higher power. And that promise was made the night of the day that I actually did the quick swab and found out that I had the antibodies present in my body, right? And so that was 2 years prior to the diagnosis. I just wasn't ready. And so when I spoke for the first time in Washington, D.C., I met the then director, Nana Khanna of Positive Women's Network. So I got connected that way. I started like doing advocacy work against HIV criminalization because I went to HIV is not a crime for the first time. And that's when it dawned on me that this is actually happening to people, right? Before that, it really wasn't a thought. I just wanted to get better. And it was the Well Project, honestly, that gave me my first position in HIV advocacy. And it was in digital organizing. I was the communications coordinator. And from there, I went to Positive Women's Network for employment, right? Now I'm at Transgender Law Center. I was the communications and training assistant. The position that Aisha hold, I was there. So it is good to see you, sis. Like, look at our evolution, right? So we just can't escape each other. We really can't. And I love it. It is so good to see you. But yeah, and like we're going to talk about it more. Like, how did I make that decision to actually do this work? But I will say that, it started from me feeling like these spaces were safe. I felt like these spaces were safe, and an article came out about my status and everything that I wasn't prepared for. So I had to walk in that truth. It was a moment of clarity for me, and I'm glad that I did. I thought that my life was over after that diagnosis, but I realized that it literally took off in a whole different direction. And I'm really, really thankful for all of the support that I have gathered from the HIV community. I call them my family, when my family and I weren't really close. And so it was through people that did this work that I was able to get to a place where I was okay being with family and being sort of exposed, around family. And yeah, so glad to see you, Celeste. Celeste was one of those people that was doing this work and that just brought me in and welcomed me into the fold. And so I'm just thankful to be around so many people that I actually call my family.
Aisha, do you want to go next?
Yes, I'll go. I was just taking myself off mute. And Tiami, it's always a pleasure to see you. So yes, as Tiami just stated, I am the training and program assistant at Positive Women's Network. I always have to remember to not say TWP when I'm on a TWP call. But I've been a part of the Well Project since I've met Maria. Maria is a very big part of the Well Project. And when she saw I was actually outed on social media, she came and inboxed me. And that is how I kind of started the communication with her. And over time, I would find myself having these feelings of wanting to contribute in some way or wanting to do some things. So I started by writing a blog. And eventually when that blog would come out, I did not make it anonymously. I decided that I wanted to go ahead and just live in that truth that has really already been created and just kind of confirming it, which I had already did. But I'll say this, the journey that I'm on and where I have landed today, I really didn't expect this for myself. I was born with HIV. And my family had always gotten income for that. So when I got old enough to get that income, for me, that was sufficient enough. I didn't realize that was enough to actually have, a real life and be able to enjoy life. And I know a combination of so many things contributed to the feelings that I had at that time, the lack of self-worth that I had, that didn't allow me to see the potential that I could reach. So I'm very excited. I recently graduated with my master's from Nova Southeastern University. I was a high school dropout. I didn't even go back and, get my diploma until I was 25. I'm 32 today. So I've literally just been on this journey for the past 6 or 7 years, growing, learning myself, using the resources along the way. Well, it went from kind of riding the tail of those resources and just not even want to do anything, because unlike some people who can't work or don't have the option, I can. I can there's things I can do to support myself and support my children. And I just needed to do that. And honestly, it took meeting a family, connecting with people at summits, and just being able to speak in different rooms, learning these skills. I always mentioned that so many of my skills that I didn't even know I had came from working in HIV spaces and being connected with other advocates who helped me along the way. It started off writing blogs, and then it went to creating trainings or having input in trainings, then to creating my own trainings, to creating programs, peer programs, things that I would have never thought I could have accomplished. I didn't see these things for myself. So it's really exciting to see where I am today and to be on this journey. And I'll share more about my journey in the following questions, but I'll pass it back to Grisel.
Yeah, and then so we got to hear a lovely presentation from Connie, but tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey.
Hi, everyone, again. So yeah, I am being the daughter of a person who has died of AIDS-related illness, kind of framed differently. My mother would not accept any kind of governmental help because we come from this family where, you work hard, you get it done, you do this. And that was something that was kind of instilled in me. And so I have been working, I have been working for a very long time, from, cleaning gas station toilets to, doing, working in plants and that kind of thing. And so to be here in a place where I am working in an academic space, I'm currently the lead math tutor at a local college. Like I said before, I am an entrepreneur. And so my work journey has taken a very interesting turn, because also a large chunk of my work history is with children and families, as an after school worker and program manager. And so a lot of that experience informs, what I do as far as wanting to see my community thrive. And so that's what I feel like my work is more entrenched in, not just the employment, but the actual effect and impact that it has on the community at large that I'm a part of.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think just even from your introductions, it is very clear that the experiences of people with HIV and related to the workforce are very diverse, right? So there are some people who, when they received an HIV diagnosis, it impacted their lives in a way where they could no longer work, or right, just and not just even the physical impact, but a lot of times it's the mental and emotional impact of a diagnosis that that affects people's ability to work. And then right, kind of like in the case of Aisha, right, like maybe there's not that kind of like before and after, but just even kind of like being able to access some of these governmental supports that delayed your entry. And so, and then there's kind of like other folks who never stopped working. I know for so coming from a Latinx like background, this was also the case for a lot of people who were undocumented. So even if they were diagnosed with HIV, they were not eligible for some of these programs, and so had to keep working, had to continue to push through no matter what. So that's kind of another nuance I want to throw into the mix there. So thank you all for sharing that. I know we have a special guest as well added to our panel, so I want to invite Celeste Watkins-Hayes to come on and say a few words as well.
Hello, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Really happy to be here with all of you. And I was asked just to give a few remarks, but really I'm so excited to just be on the Zoom screen with you all and just to be in your presence, because your stories and what you represent are just so important, and they're so important for so many people to hear. And Connie, I will say, and I'm going to say Dr. Johnson, because that presentation was PhD level. So I'm just waiting for the PhD. The way that you contextualized our experiences is so important. As we go through our different challenges and struggles, we often individualize them. It's about me and what I've experienced. And if I'm struggling, what is it that I'm doing? What is it that I'm doing wrong, et cetera? And to be sure, yes, we sometimes make mistakes. But what we have to understand, and what you highlight so beautifully, is that we are operating in a very long historical trajectory that has historically, and in many ways in contemporary times, has not supported, loved, affirmed Black women in all of our forms. So one of the things that you highlighted so beautifully is that we are operating in a historical context that has always been a hostile territory for us, that has always been unsupportive of us. And what you were able to show so beautifully is the progress that we've made despite that struggle. So I just want to thank you for encouraging us to hold both of those things in our hands, to hold the struggle, to hold the trauma, to hold the inequality in one hand, but also to recognize the power, the beauty, the perseverance, the resilience that we as Black women demonstrate on each and every day. And I would add all women of color to that, as we think about the ways in which both gender and class and race operate in ways that perpetuate these inequities. And one of the things that's also so beautiful about this panel is that we're hearing about the context, we're hearing about the landscape, we're hearing about the history, but then we're hearing about when and where you all enter, the ways in which you are intervening and interrupting many of those trends of trauma and violence and inequity with the work that you're doing. You're interrupting that. You are calling to question a model and a framework that has undermined our humanity for centuries. And your presence is so important for that. And one of the things that I think, you know, that really was highlighted in the book Remaking a Life that I wrote, and I was very, very fortunate to be able to interview Tiomi for it, is that being able to enter these spaces and these conversations is life-saving. It's life-saving for people. And in terms of being able to hear stories and be inspired by them, but the work that you're doing in terms of shaping policy. Tiomi's been to the White House to be able to influence policy and the conversations that you're having and the ways in which, you know, we've gone back to school and gotten more education and really entered into these spaces to interrupt exactly what Connie highlighted, Dr. Johnson highlighted in terms of the historical inequities and traumas that Black women have experienced. So I hope that we can stay motivated. I hope that we can stay inspired. We have a lot of victories to point to in terms of the ways in which the HIV community and the contributions of women in particular to that community have been able to build out community supports and access to resources and a safety net for so many, but we know it's not helping and shaping and touching as many people as it needs to. So we have work to do there. And then I also hope that we recognize that we have work to do in the larger context that we're operating in. There is an assault on transgender rights, LGBTQ rights, women's reproductive rights. So we need to be ready to continue to do this work. So I see these sessions as fuel. I see these sessions as the recharge that we need to be able to then go out and continue to influence at the policy level, at the level of institutions, and then at the level of just our neighborhood conversations where we're all sitting on the stoop together or sitting around the table together, and people need to be better informed about our lives and our experiences and the importance and the impact of what they say and how we need to interrupt at the interpersonal level, at the institutional level, and at the policy level, the inequities that we have seen. So I just thank you. And I just encourage you to continue doing the work. I'm going to continue doing the work because you have inspired me and you continue to inspire me. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for your additions and comments. So I want to come back to our panel and dive a little bit deeper. I was thinking more about some of the things that you've shared so far. And actually, I have a question specifically for Aisha. Right. So you talked a little bit about your journey and how that changed, right? In terms of being used to being dependent on social supports and then something changed in your 20s. So I want to hear a little bit more about that. If you want to share, like what was that point in your journey? Like what changed, right? So I know you mentioned a little bit of getting connected to the HIV community, but please share a little bit more on that.
So I believe if I want to credit anything, it would honestly be just the moment I kind of woke up and realized what I had wasn't enough and that I had the ability to do more for myself. I was a teen parent, so having a daughter at the age of 17 and already living a life where things were pretty much given to me. I also went to Children's Diagnostic and Treatment Center in Broward County, and the sponsorship they received there, the donations they received there, they had a lot of community support. And I mean, every holiday, birthday, even every summer, we would take long trips. There was so much things that was happening in my life, even when I didn't know I was living with HIV. So when I did kind of find out I was living with HIV and at camp around the time I was 16, for me, that was a point where I realized this, or felt that something was wrong with me in that moment. And I really acquired such a low self-worth. And I know that's exactly what it was. That's what kept me, just accepting those crumbs of money while I had a child. That's what allowed me to really just sit on every government assistance that I could receive and get. I would even go into these organizations with attitudes because I'm turning in things late. Now I want you to rush, and so I really just had to have a wake up call. My daughter was about 5 years old, and I'm like, you have to get it together. Around that time, I was also outed on social media. and I started receiving support. So I'm seeing women living and thriving with HIV. At the time, the only example of a woman living with HIV, or a person who had lived with HIV, was my mother, because that's who I knew I had got my status from. And I know she died very young. She died at the age of 27 and I was 11. So of course, now you have that history repeated cycle of teen parenthood, relying on services and those types of things. And yeah, so I just woke up and I realized that I needed more, and being around people that were doing things, getting work done. They weren't sitting around, hiding from their status or hiding from community. They were being a part of the work, and it was helping them to learn more about themselves. And it happened by mistake at first. I just started growing. Things just were happening. And then I started realizing, like, I need a job. I need to work. And my first job wasn't in HIV. After I was outed, I actually had gotten a real job working at some pharmacy over the phone. But for me, that was like my first real job. And it wasn't my first job. It's just the only first job that I really kept and really worked towards and came in with commitment. But in all honesty, I really just want to credit my sisterhood, but it took me, to be honest. It took me waking up myself, because I had people pouring into me all of my life and I would use it, abuse it. I've had people walk away from me. So it really took me getting out of my own way and looking at other people and realizing, you can make a great life for yourself. You don't have to look at people and hope and wish and say one day. You start working on it. Like I said, I have my master's now. I remember when I first was working on my GED, I was like, oh, this is so long, I'm not gonna be able to do it. So imagine all of this time, and it's just one step at a time. And I just took each step until I accomplished something.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I think the quote that's staying with me right now is like, I realized that what I had wasn't enough, right? And I imagine it's not just economically, right? It sounds like being able to work on yourself, like, gave you so much more. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to turn another question. So something that, right, kind of tied to that, I know, Tiomi, you wanted to weigh in on this as well, right? Like how eligibility for medical and social services impacted your decisions around employment, precisely because, right, as was shared as part of the intro, in order to be eligible for programs such as Ryan White and other programs like that, you need to make below a certain income. So can you please speak on that, Tiomi?
Sure, thank you. And before I even got into Ryan White, right, before the HIV diagnosis, like, there were moments of that forced poverty that we talked about, where the jobs that I had weren't enough to sustain the household, so it wasn't enough for groceries. So I applied for food stamps, and that was the first restriction on income, right? So during that time that I received food stamps, I was in college, right? And so I was in college, I wasn't living on my own. And I felt that, that was sufficient, kind of like Aisha. I felt like that was sufficient. It was just me, there were no kids. Then I get my own apartment after the HIV diagnosis, right? And I'm on my own. And Ryan White was a lifesaver, because it paid for the medication, it paid for dentist visits, it paid for mental health visits, and things that I really, really needed, right? And so I was able to get on Ryan White, and as you said, there was an income cap. And so I always worked like underneath that income, right? So I stayed inside that poverty level. I would work at fast food restaurants so that I could keep Ryan White, so that if anything happened, I could, access the HOPWA funds and, get my rent paid for a month, because that was the extent of what I had available here in Arkansas. So there was no plan that actually like took care of my rent as a person living with HIV. I didn't have that. So I have always like had to work hard to make sure that, you know, my ends were met. And then I came into Positive Women's Network, and the starting salary that they offered me is what kicked me off of Ryan White, right? And so for the first time, I was like, okay, I have comprehensive health insurance, right? And so I had insurance through my employer, through Positive Women's Network. And instead of everything being free, there was a copay for the medicine. And that was fine. That was fine. And so I had gotten so used to it though, that I stopped even paying attention to when the income cap was raised with Ryan White, right? So there were moments where financially it was a struggle to maintain Uber rides to the doctor. It was a struggle maintaining the co-pays to the doctor, the co-pays for the medicine. And as a trans woman, when they took my hormones off the formulary, I had to pay that out of pocket. And so like not changing insurance or anything, it's just something that the insurance companies did. They took my one medicine off, and I also came to a point where I became really like irritated. My skin was really irritated because of the meds. So there was some changing of my regimen, predominantly still in the same class, but like the dosages were different. And what ended up happening was that those fees became exorbitant because the medicine became more expensive, right? And so it wasn't actually until I had already started working at Transgender Law Center that I realized that I could go back onto Ryan White because the income cap had been raised. And so what that has looked like for me, it has been a godsend, like knowing that the income cap has raised because the copay for my med is $200, you know, like that's the copay. And so like I have to pay that out of pocket. Yeah, I'm like, at first I did not know, you know, and I don't know if it was me not paying attention or if or what the case may have been, but at some point the income cap was raised and I fell on a lot of financial hardships, even having a job, simply because of my status, right? Trying to take care of myself and remain healthy and not have any lapse in treatment. But financially, it was a struggle, even having income. And so, yeah, thank you for allowing me to talk about that, because it was real.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think it highlights a huge issue that I think we can dedicate a whole other webinar on, right? Just how these income caps to be eligible for our basic healthcare, right? And so thank you for shining light on that. So I want to turn over to Connie, and I mean, we've gotten to hear a little bit and witness your accomplishments so far. And so I'd like you to share a little bit about what kinds of supports, right? So whether it's resources, individuals, or experiences that you've had that have made your work and academic pursuits possible.
So I would say that the only reason that my academic pursuits are possible is because of my mother. And, you know, it all goes back to her. Like she's my foundation. My mother was an avid reader. So therefore, I grew up in an area where there was low literacy. A lot of my childhood was took place in areas where a lot of children around me could not read, but in my home, there were always books. So I credit her when it comes to achieving academically. And I haven't been that way all the time. Like I graduated from high school by the skin of my teeth. But to be honest, my HIV diagnosis was a catalyst for saying, okay, so it's a possibility that I am living with an illness that is detrimental to my life and how I'm living. And I really had to take stock in what it is that I was wanting to do and who I wanted to be. And so that made a huge difference in how I approached my academic and employment pursuits. And I actually, to be honest, I had dropped out of school 3 times. So it took 5 tries for me to get my bachelor's degree. And the 4th try was when I was diagnosed. I was actually on a college campus when there was a testing van showed up on campus one day, and I was diagnosed. And once I was diagnosed, I couldn't really focus academically, but I was able to gather myself together, try it again. That was also the time when I started working with children and fell in love with it and was doing after school care. But at the time I was taking medications that my body wasn't used to, and I had, side effects, and I could not continue working. And so I have had these challenges with living with HIV and continuing to work and continuing to go through these educational pursuits. But by the grace of God, only by the grace of God, things kind of smoothed out, and I was, put on the right medication, and I had, enough support around me. Like I said, I was introduced to, Deidre Malloy here in Columbia, South Carolina, was very instrumental in my progress as a woman living with HIV. Like she was one of the first people that I saw that was, thriving with HIV, and kind of, took me under her wing. And that's where I, got introduced to Common Threads. And that's where I got introduced to Vanessa Johnson and women like that. And I had some examples of women who were thriving. So I do credit them as well. When it comes to my employment, honestly, there have been jobs that kind of fall in my lap. To be honest, I never wanted HIV to be the central focus of my work, because I felt like it was such a small part of who I am, and so it's a small part of who I am. And so I didn't want to do HIV work in that way. So I kind of backed away to reframe it, to do it the way that kind of feels natural to me. And it took on the way it looks now is for me to work with children, to work with young women who are, 10, 11, 12, 13, to help them know who they are, to know their purpose, because women living with HIV were once girls, And so that's kind of how my work looks now. So it's been an evolution of how I wanted to approach the work and to impact the community, as well as, involving the HIV piece, if that all makes sense.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And right, you definitely name dropped some amazing people in the field. And I just want to acknowledge that the 3 of you now are those examples that people have in community, right? And so from your different types of journeys of what you've been through and what you've shared with us today, I think you are now those beacons of hope for people that can see, no matter what they're going through right now, it's also something that's possible for them if it's something that they want, right? Because the other conversation is just like work and education aren't the only things that give us personal fulfillment, right? And so I am sure there are so many other things about you that bring you pride and joy as well. And so I want to do a quick time check. I know we had some technical difficulties in the beginning. We do have time for about 1 or 2 questions from the audience. If there is anybody who has any burning questions, I invite you to request to come off mute or type your question in the chat, because we have just a few minutes to be able to do so. So I'll give it a second. Okay, so maybe I think with the time we have left, there might not be so much. So I'll actually ask the last question I did want to ask you, which I just recently referenced, right? So the last question I have for you today is if you could go ahead and share what is something outside of your academic or work pursuits that brings you pride and joy. So let's go ahead and start with Tiomi.
Okay, I was trying to think, do I want to, okay, so I'm in a relationship that brings me joy, and like just being supported, that really like, it's something that I hadn't really experienced on an intimate level like that. Yes, I've had friends to support me, but like my totality never came from, and being supported in my totality never came from like a partner. And so I truly believe that I have a life partner now. But aside from that, because we're not in the same household, what brings me joy is actually cooking. And I will have an idea for something that I want to eat, and I will get all the ingredients, and then I have to go to YouTube to like look at how to cook all of this, right? And so I am eating leaner and healthier now. And so like, I'm just finding that I have a lot more energy in doing so. So actually getting back to what it is that I want is bringing me joy. And I'm in a space and place mentally and physically to where I can actually pay attention to what it is that I want and manifest that.
I love that. That makes me so happy for you. And we look forward to a web series, Cooking with Tiomi. What about you, Aisha?
I am finding happiness and joy in just setting new standards and just really creating new habits for my life, for my children, and really just being unapologetic. You know, I grew up not really having boundaries. That wasn't really something we were taught to have. In all honesty, we were kind of taught the exact opposite, that you just kind of fall in line. So being the person that I am today, with the strength I have today, the confidence I have today, that's what brings me so much joy. It really does, because, you know, it makes it even more possible to do the work and to not be bothered by things that people say. So again, what just brings me happiness and joy is just being completely me and setting a good life for my children.
I love that. That's so beautiful. Just, you know, and again, like we were saying, right? Like, it's not just about like our labor in the society, but it's just being, and that in of itself is fulfilling. So thank you for sharing that. And what about you, Connie?
Music brings me joy. So I've been singing forever and ever and ever. And so anytime there is music involved, I had the opportunity to go to a live concert for the first time since the pandemic this past weekend, and it was amazing. And I danced all weekend. And so that is what's bringing me joy in this moment, music and dancing.
Wonderful. Yeah. So I think a good reminder for all of us, right? Just to experience joy. So we're going to start to wrap up. And before we do, I want to read a comment that came through the chat from one of our CAB members, Bose. And so she says, my greatest fear in my life is my academic and career background. I am pushing myself to get a nursing degree because this is my passion. Thank you all so much. I am inspired. So thank you for sharing that, Bose. And again, as I mentioned, our panelists, so the three of you are those beacons of hope now and inspiration for others. So Thank you for sharing your experiences with us today. Thank you for being you. And yeah, so this is gonna start to close up our webinar presentation for today. Please take a moment to help us improve our programming by completing the evaluation surveys that were just dropped in the chat. There's also one in Spanish, so please take a moment to do that. We'll be emailing the slides that we had today, along with some resources on the topic. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us for our program today. And so this concludes our program. Bye, thank you, and thanks for our interpreters. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and end since we've seen everyone out. Thank you so much. That was amazing. Such a rich conversation and led so beautifully by you, Grisel. Thank you so much.
Yay.
All right, and thank you, Susanna and Florencia as well. Y'all
Yes.
were awesome rolling
Yes.
with everything. Okay, we will check in the off thread, but take care, everyone.
Bye.